Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, April 16th. I hope you got your taxes in yesterday. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I don't know if you caught this, but billionaire Mark Cuban posted what he was going to have to pay in taxes this year. Jill, the total in his taxes, $275,900,000 on an income, obviously, of much greater than that. Though Cuban was trying to prove a point, he said, I'm proud to be able to give back to our country. After military service, paying your taxes is the most patriotic thing you can do. A message potentially to some fellow billionaires and millionaires who try to get their taxes down to as little as possible.
He is a mensch, Moshe.
Jill, imagine, not income, your tax assessment, $275 million. Though it does come as Jeff Bezos is among those who moved to Florida to bring down his taxes. Of course, he's worth more than $200 billion. So his move from Washington State, I think, saved him several billion in taxes.
I thought he said he moved to take care of his parents.
Oh, yeah. He wanted to be closer to mom and dad.
And Moshe, someone else who I bet is paying a lot in taxes as well, Will Smith. He apparently made a cameo at Coachella a couple of days ago. He wore some Ray-Bans for a surprise performance during J Balvin's set. He sang his 1997 hit, Men in Black, and the crowd went wild.
I mean, he's going back to the classics there as he tries to recover his reputation, it sounds like. But still looking sharp in that suit. I guess this now means that Will is trying to get back out there a couple of years after the slap heard around the world. By the way, we should note, one of our followers on the Mo News Instagram account, J Balvin.
Well, if he's a podcast listener, hello. Thank you for listening. So glad you're here.
We'll have to message him. He is an international music superstar. But if he has a chance to listen to the pod, we hope to bring you over here as well, Jay.
All right, let's get to some headlines here. Starting once again in the Middle East, where an Israeli response to Iran's unprecedented attack from this weekend could be imminent. To the environment, NOAA is sounding the alarm about the world's coral reefs at danger of bleaching from record warm water temperature. We'll tell you what exactly that means. Donald Trump's hush money trial kicks off in Manhattan. What went on inside of the courthouse and outside? Plus, the FBI is now launching a criminal investigation into the Baltimore bridge collapse. And the armorer for the Alec Baldwin Western film Rust has been sentenced to 18 months behind bars. Plus, the results of a new survey that show Americans are sleeping less and are more stressed.
Surprise.
And Moshe has on this day in history. Anything as good as the real meaning of bop.
Jill, this was a big day for Nelly releasing Hot in Here, though I haven't figured out where he was referring to. I think he's generally speaking about clubs.
All right, let's start in the Middle East. An Israeli response to Iran's retaliatory attack could be imminent. This is according to Israeli officials. The country's war cabinet met on Monday, weighing their next steps. Israel does intend to punish Iran for the drone and missile barrage. It was Iran's first ever direct attack on Israel, but they're walking a fine line here. They want to retaliate, but also avoid further escalation. Israel also wants to preserve the partnership with the US, UK, France, and others that really help to fend off the assault. And they don't want to derail their war aims in Gaza. They're getting a lot of pressure from the West to declare victory from what happened this weekend and just move on. Again, Iran's attack over the weekend was in response to the killing by Israel of a senior Iranian general at a diplomatic building in Damascus, Syria. Iran said they are done for now. The head of the Israeli military, though, saying that they are looking ahead and considering their next steps. They say the launching of so many missiles, cruise missiles, and drones into Israeli territory will be met with a response. Iran and Israel clashed at an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council on the last day, with Iran insisting it does not seek further escalation after launching that barrage of 300 drones and missiles. But now they are warning of more decisive strikes in retaliation to any Israeli counterattack. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez saying it is time to step back from the brink as a chorus of world leaders are urging restraint here. President Biden has warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu against launching new strikes on Iran. He said that the U.S. would not participate in any offensive actions against Iran, but the White House leaked to the media that Biden fears Netanyahu could drag the United States into a wider conflict, depending on his actions.
What's interesting, Jill, will be the definition of offensive. For example, the Pentagon itself has launched attacks on Houthi missile targets, referring to them as defensive because they knew the Houthis were going to use them. So can they come up with some calibration here that feels defensive? Do you take out a drone factory, for example, which, of course, the drones were used in the attack on Israel here. So Israel faces an increasingly delicate set of political calculations here. It's already fighting a war on 3 fronts: in Gaza against Hamas, on the northern border against Hezbollah, and it has unrest in the West Bank right now. So 3 sides of Israel there. It's also under pressure to restore deterrence with Iran, despite these calls for restraint. They do not want to set the precedent that Iran can think it can just send a few hundred missiles their way. By the way, it's been noted now that Saturday night was the most expensive night in Israeli history. It cost them more than $1 billion to shoot down all of these Iranian missiles and drones.
That's more than Mark Cuban paid in taxes.
That is more than Mark Cuban pays in taxes. And while Israel has a very robust economy, that is super expensive. So they want to reestablish deterrence without provoking a larger war. So how do you do that, right? How do you navigate that and try to thread the needle here, especially somebody like Netanyahu, who has a pretty rough relationship right now with Biden and has certain domestic implications? The former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, he's also an author with a number of books about the region, said the point is to respond smartly in a way that won't undermine the opportunity for regional and international cooperation that we created. John Kirby over at the White House says that the U.S. doesn't tell the Israelis what to do. It's an Israeli decision to respond here. But of course, behind the scenes, there's a lot of coordination and discussions and phone calls here. One interesting note here, Jill, is that the Iranians might be looking to take advantage of the fact that there's been a divide here between Biden and Netanyahu. And so for now, they think they can do this, whereas during a Trump administration that might be closer to the Israeli government, it would be harder for Iran to try to draw division there. So they might be looking at that in sort of a diplomatic strategy as far as their next move here. I mentioned domestic politics. That's key here. Netanyahu's base, he probably still has popularity among about a quarter of the country. They're disgruntled, his core base, the people who are left with him, because he hasn't launched the operation in Rafah yet. And that doesn't seem imminent in the Gaza Strip. Israel pulled most of its soldiers out of Gaza. And so he's getting a lot of push from the right saying, you got to respond here. We're looking for some strong retaliation. And I think that that's beyond the right in Israel. The majority of Israelis would say we need a response to what took place on Saturday night. We can't live in a world where Iran can just do this once in a while. So domestic politics here, international diplomacy here, a 3-front war the Israelis are already facing, the U.S. and the West not wanting Iran to be super empowered beyond what they already are, but at the same time not wanting a larger regional war. There's a lot of factors here. That's a long laundry list of things that go into. So now what? What do we bomb? Is the discussion. I mean, literally behind the scenes in Israel is like, what do you go after? What requires the U.S.? Hey, Pentagon, we're thinking about this. What do you guys think about this? Because remember, when it comes to overall views of the situation, the U.S. and Israel are in lockstep. They don't want Iran to get nukes. They think the IRGC is a terror group. They've both been victim of the Iranian government over the course of the past 4 decades. At the same time, Israel faces the imminent threat in the region. For the U.S., all Biden wants is for this stuff to end already. He's got to run for re-election. And this chaos doesn't play well, right? You know, Americans will just go to the polls in November if this stuff is still, there's a thing about this being like, I just, I need change. Like this, the world's too crazy right now. And so, Biden wants to return to talking about abortion and talking about key issues here domestically and talking about, what he believes is Trump's threat to democracy, right? Yada, yada, yada. The last thing he needs is foreign policy being the front focus of this, especially at a time of complete chaos where Trump is going to make the argument, the world was calmer under me. And so a lot of factors here that we're watching, a lot that we don't know that's happening behind the scenes here. And so I guess all of us will just have to stay tuned here to see what happens next.
There is a lot of talks about potentially one of the targets being Iran's nuclear facilities, but those are underground, which does complicate the situation for Israel in terms of taking them out.
Yeah, I mean, Iran's very close to getting a nuclear weapon. They've halted it various times. There was a deal at times for them not to develop it. Then the U.S. pulled out of the deal. The Iranians said they were going to pursue weapons again. So it's relatively imminent. Behind the scenes, there's been a cloak and dagger affair we've been watching for a couple of decades, meaning the Mossad, various intelligence groups. Suddenly, an Iranian nuclear scientist is found dead somewhere or shot somewhere. And that's been the campaign until now to try to slow down the Iranian program. The question here is, do you do something, much more public, much more explosive in trying to slow down that program and hit that target? That will be a challenge for the Israelis here. Again, there's no shortage of targets. It's a very well-armed country. The Iranian regime spends a lot of money on its military. And so they have missile sites, they have drone factories, they have RGC, Revolutionary Guard sites. So there's a whole variety of targets. The question is, how many, what, when, what's the argument behind it? Can you make a defensive argument about it? What does the Pentagon think about it all? And what is the amount they can do without provoking something like we saw on Saturday night?
All right, now to an important environmental story not getting a ton of attention. Scientists on Monday are sounding the alarm about what they expect to be the widest ever global coral crisis. NOAA and international partners say that rising sea temperatures around the planet have caused this major coral bleaching. It is the fourth global bleaching event on record. The previous were in 1998, 2010, and 2016. Why this all matters. The bleaching threatens the coral reefs, which are vital ecosystems. They support fish that, of course, become food for millions of people. They help protect coasts from erosion and storms. And then there's the economic impact, estimated to be about $2.7 trillion every year in fishing and tourism for countries around the world. What exactly is bleaching? It is when the corals become so stressed that they lose the algae that they need to survive. They technically can recover, but if the water that surrounds them is too hot for too long, they cannot survive.
Jill, it's hard to overstate how important coral reefs are to the entire world. Remember, the Earth is 70% oceans. And the coral reefs, they're the cradles of marine life. A quarter of the ocean species at some point spend their life cycles there. And those creatures then are part of the larger cycle of life of the ocean. The economic value, they tried to put an estimate on this, is $2.7 trillion annually in terms of the value coral reefs bring to humanity. They buffer shorelines against 97% of the energy from waves, storms, floods. So basically, if you live anywhere near a coastline, your best friend is the coral reefs. So these are hugely important, not just for life in the ocean, but those of us who are landbound here, those of us who live on land. And you can already see right now along coastlines from Australia to Mexico, many of the most colorful coral reefs have turned a very ghostly white. That's something that's impacted at least 54 countries in the past year, again, triggered by the rising ocean temperatures. The bleaching event that we're seeing right now, like the last three, also came during the El Nino climate pattern. But now we have climate change really impacting ocean temperature. So it's taking things even higher, this double whammy impact of El Nino and climate change. And they're worried now that while coral reefs can withstand some of this and recover, that this prolonged heat stress is a major problem. One ecologist saying what is happening is new for us and it's new to science right now. The estimates here are that anywhere from 70 to 90% of the coral reefs will be lost. Jill, there have been projects to try to regrow coral reef, but very limited, very expensive, and not anything that can help in the near term or even medium term or long term really regrow what is being killed off right now. So ocean temps do matter here. Again, when we're talking about a degree here, this matters significantly, both on Earth and in the oceans. Recent aerial surveys have shown that there are very high and extreme levels of bleaching in nearly half of the surveyed reefs in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park area. That's down under in Australia.
Moshe, about 20 years ago now, I went scuba diving down there in Australia by the coral reefs, and it was gorgeous. Of course, this was before the bleaching happened, and it is home to so much wildlife. Fish, dolphins were swimming next to our sailboat. And so this really is a climate emergency.
Jill, I want to take this opportunity actually to mention there's a new book out today by Bill Weir. He's the climate correspondent, the chief climate correspondent over at CNN, a friend of the mo.news podcast, along with his producer, Julian Quinones. So he's out, he's traveled, he's done stories on this as well. His new book out called Life as We Know It Can Be, Stories of People, Climate, and Hope in a Changing World. So while Jill and I may have depressed you these past couple of minutes with our talk of the state of play right now, Bill in his book actually tries to tell the stories of people trying to change things and some of the positive impact they have had. So Bill Weir's book, Life as We Know It Can Be, on sale today. Bill, I don't know if you're listening, but good luck with the book. And if you're looking for even more information on this, because you guys are all podcast listeners, over at Mo News, The Interview, you know that other podcast. If you're not following it, listening to it, you should be today. Episode 69 of the Mo News Interview podcast. We dive deep, literally, not literally, but figuratively, into the ocean and the importance of the ocean with two climatologists and wildlife photographers. So check that out over, again, Mo News, The Interview, episode 69 from December, talking about the world's oceans.
Plenty of news coming up, but we want to get to a couple of our partners. You may have noticed a new partner on Instagram and in our newsletter last week, Hair Story, which is rethinking hair care with fewer, better products. Their signature product, New Wash, is a first of its kind cream cleanser that washes and moisturizes hair, replacing shampoo and conditioner in one healthy step. But again, new technology called a cream cleanser. Mosh and I have both tried it. It has become part of my routine. It's formulated with nourishing essential oils and naturally derived cleansing agents. New Wash restores the balance of your scalp. It adds volume and shine. And it also extends the time between wash days, which for me is extremely important because for whatever reason, as I've gotten older, I hate washing my hair.
Jill, you're a midday showerer, if I remember correctly, right? Yes.
That is good news, though, for your hair, and it is great news for the planet. So take 20% off your entire order at hairstory.com. That is HAIRSTORY.com with this exclusive code for Mo News listeners, MONEWS. That is MONEWS at hairstory.com. Try it today.
All right, as we're all on the go here, trying to still get our meals in, and we want to ensure they're healthy and nutritious, we're loving over here at the Mo News Pod Factor meals. If you're pressed for time in your house, you're on the go, you still want to eat healthy, it might be time to try Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. You can select from more than 3 dozen options on their website, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Jill, there was like a Tex-Mex bean and rice and chicken dish I loved recently. They're not frozen. They're just refrigerated, and so they're ready to go. Just with 2 minutes, you can pop in the microwave. Some of the meals, though, are ready to eat without being heated up. So you save all that time going to the grocery store, but you're still getting your dietitian-approved, chef-prepared meals on the go here. They also have cold-pressed juices and shakes and smoothies ready in just 2 minutes. As they say, no prep, no mess. We have a special deal right now for the Mo News community, and it even gets better here. You can head to factormeals.com/MoNews50. Use the code MoNews50, and you get 50% off your first box of meals and 20% off your next box. So again, the code is MoNews50 over at factormeals.com. That is FACTOR meals.com/MoNews50 for 50% off your first box and 20% off your second box.
And we're always talking about health trends and food trends and how hard it is to get all of your nutrients. Well, one way to get all of the important ones is Athletic Greens AG1 powder. It is just 1 scoop with a glass of water in the morning. It is easy and it's quick and it lets you get on with your day, knowing that you've gotten over 75 important ingredients, including tons of vitamins and minerals. It also has pre and probiotics to support digestion and gut health. You could think of it kind of like an insurance policy for your health. You drink it in the morning and you're pretty much good to go. At least that's how one of my friends likes to describe it. Now, with your first purchase of AG1, Athletic Greens is giving Mo News listeners a free 1-year supply of their vitamin D and 5 free travel packs of AG1. Visit drinkag1.com/MoNews to take advantage of this offer. You can get a discounted monthly subscription or try it one time for just a month. Again, that is drinkag1.com/MoNews, MONEWS for this special deal and really start to take ownership of your health. Time for the speed read from NBC News. Monday marked the first day of Donald Trump's historic criminal trial. We set the table yesterday, so we do want to quickly mention what happened on day one. This is the first time in American history that a former president has faced a criminal trial against him, and it appears like the jury selection process, no surprise, is going to take a while. The initial pool of prospective jurors who arrived dwindled rapidly. More than half of the first group of 96 were dismissed in short order after indicating that they did not believe they could be impartial with the former president as a defendant. Court adjourned for the day roughly 2 hours after jury selection began, with 0 jurors chosen. A reminder that more than 6,000 New Yorkers have been subpoenaed for the eventual 12 spots.
And Jill, They might have to go through nearly all of them to get these 12 jurors. Just imagine trying to find jurors who are like, I don't have an opinion about former President Trump. It's hard enough with like major public figures, but this is next level, right? The former president, is a criminal defendant here. And so you probably need to find someone who didn't vote in the last couple cycles and just like sort of doesn't care and is very apolitical. But it's going to take a while to find that. And of course, both legal teams are trying to ensure they're going to find jurors who are friendly to their argument. And so, as we noted yesterday, this could take weeks, but yeah, 0 for about 50 on the first day.
As a reminder, this case is over alleged hush money payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels during his first presidential campaign. He's accused of falsifying documents related to those payments. His attorney paid Daniels, and then Trump reimbursed the attorney, but labeled those expenses inaccurately. Trump was in the New York courtroom for the duration of the proceedings, although at a couple of points, according to New York Times' Maggie Haberman, he appeared to briefly fall asleep.
Jury selection, very exhausting, Jill.
But not only was he there, he was posting on social media and also talking to reporters. Per usual, he called this trial a witch hunt and politically motivated.
There is no case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump said this is an outrage that this case was brought. This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought.
On day one, some small wins for Trump and also for the prosecution. To start, the judge, Juan Merchan, declined to recuse himself from the trial, as was requested by Trump's team. And the reason is because Merchan's daughter has worked for some Democratic candidates. So Trump's team argued that he wouldn't be able to get a fair trial and that there's a conflict of interest.
So you have Merchan saying here, who my daughter works for doesn't matter when it comes to how I will conduct myself in this case.
So he's staying on the case. He's scheduled a hearing for next week on claims from the prosecutors that Trump violated the gag order in the case. And outside of the courthouse, the New York Times says the scene had elements of a feisty political skirmish and a surreal circus rolled into one with a mix of gawkers, activists, publicity hounds, and mostly, though, a large contingent of journalists.
Yeah, our producer, Emily Gross, was at the scene yesterday and said that journalists outnumbered any of the protesters and gawkers 5-1, reporters to anyone who decided to check out the courthouse yesterday. We should note another decision in the last day here. The judge ruled that Karen McDougal, who's another woman who said she had an affair with Trump, can testify. She was also paid a hush money payment here in the lead up to the 2016 election. So this will be another example the prosecution hopes to show to prove their case here. On the other side, Merchan said that prosecutors cannot play tapes from the Access Hollywood, grab them by the comments that Trump made, but they can summarize them. So they got to make a decision, basically what pieces of evidence and what various things from Trump's past they can enter into evidence here and how relevant they are. It turns out the prosecutors are not going to be able to go into any sexual assault allegations against Trump. Of course, he's had that civil verdict against him in the case of E. Jean Carroll, the columnist. Nonetheless, Jill, none of this really gets underway until they have a jury, and it's going to take a while. So stay tuned.
From the Washington Post, the FBI has opened a criminal investigation into the massive container ship that brought down the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore on March 26th. The investigation will look at whether the crew left the port knowing the vessel had serious systems problems, among other issues. The crew, just about 24, by the way, still living on the ship.
Yeah, they had food and clothes and everything for a very slow trip to Sri Lanka, Jill. So they appear to be good right now, still living on the ship, as it has a bridge on top of it that they're clearing right now. And none of them are cleared to leave the ship until this investigation is over.
Federal agents boarded the ship on Monday morning to start the investigation. The 213 million pound dolly ship crashed into one of the support beams of the bridge and killed 6 construction workers who were on the bridge at the time fixing potholes. The criminal inquiry escalates efforts to determine what occurred leading to the crash and ultimately who should be held accountable for it.
Also on the local level, Yesterday, Baltimore's mayor announced that the city has hired 2 law firms to work with the city's own legal team to hold what he says the wrongdoers responsible and to mitigate the immediate and long-term harm to Baltimore City residents. The Dolly's owner and manager, which is based in Singapore, within days of the crash, has filed a petition in federal court to limit its liability. No surprise there. We've also told you about the provision from the 1800s that the owners of the Titanic used to limit their liability. That provision from the mid-1800s is still in effect here. So they might use some of the similar defenses that Titanic owners used back 100 years ago. So that'll be something to watch here. Additionally, yesterday, private attorneys for 3 of the construction workers who fell into the river, including 1 who survived and 2 who died, announced they're pursuing legal action here. So there's a whole legal mess happening. Then there are investigations. You mentioned the FBI investigation. There's also a separate investigation from the National Transportation Safety Board based out of the Transportation Department to determine the cause of the crash and assess other safety-related measures that now need to be implemented across the country to protect vital bridges, both on the East Coast and the South and in the West Coast. Jill, all this legal mess is one of the reasons why Biden has called on Congress to give them the funds to start rebuilding this bridge. Given all these lawsuits, if they wait for the money to come from Singapore, there might not be a bridge there for a decade or more. So the whole point the White House is making here is give us the money, let us rebuild it. Don't worry, we'll eventually collect the money from, who's at fault here. But we can't wait for that, given how vital this is, both for transportation purposes, but also for the Port of Baltimore. It has national implications.
From NBC News, the armorer who was responsible for the firearms on that Alec Baldwin Western film received her sentence on Monday. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was sentenced to the maximum penalty of 18 months in prison for the killing of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. She was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter last month for overseeing arms on the set of the movie Rust, where Hutchins was shot and killed on October 21st, 2021. The judge referenced Gutierrez-Reed's lack of remorse ahead of handing down the sentence. The judge said that it was actually Gutierrez-Reed's attorney who had to tell the court that she was remorseful, not Gutierrez-Reed herself. Following the sentence, she said, "You were the armorer who stood between a safe weapon and a weapon that could kill someone. So if you had done your job, she would be alive." Prosecutors had sought that maximum penalty of 18 months in state prison. At the start of the sentencing hearing, the New Mexico special prosecutor said that she reviewed Gutierrez-Reed's phone calls from jail to inform what sentence length to recommend to the judge. And in recorded jail phone conversations with her mother, boyfriend, and her attorney's paralegal, Gutierrez-Reed called jurors idiots and a-holes while complaining about the length of time that it took them to deliberate. That is according to a recent filing by prosecutors.
Not a great move when you're on trial and going after the jury here. The special prosecutor is saying that the calls by Gutierrez-Reed, quote, tell us who she really is, and that she does not take responsibility for the Hutchins death, and that she chooses to place blame on the witnesses that testified against her. Remember, we've told you about this. The set was a mess. There were real bullets, there were fake bullets, and Gutierrez-Reed was like, I don't know where those things came from. Somehow a real bullet got loaded into a gun on a movie set. And so those are the implications here. So they're putting her away, it appears, for 18 months in New Mexico. The Rust director, Joel Souza, who was also injured in the incident but survived, read a victim impact statement virtually. He said the last 2.5 years have been difficult to put into words, and that I want everyone damaged by Ms. Reed's failures that day to find peace. I want that pain to go away. In talking about Helena Hutchins, he said she had a talent for life. She was a touchstone for all who knew her, and those of us who were lucky enough to have shared her in a fleeting time on this planet were better for it. Gutierrez-Reed was crying as she addressed the court, asking for probation, saying that my heart aches for Hutchins and her friends and family. Now the attention goes to Alec Baldwin. His trial is set for July 10th after a grand jury indicted him on a charge of involuntary manslaughter. Remember, he says he didn't actually pull the trigger. Other folks who've investigated this have said the gun doesn't go off without you touching the trigger. So he's going to be facing trial July 10th. It appears Gutierrez-Reed said she will not be testifying in that trial, but she wants him to go to jail as well, she has said.
And finally, from Newsweek, younger generations are most likely to report that they aren't getting enough sleep. Research into the sleeping habits of Americans by Gallup found that people aged 30 to 49 which is mostly millennials and young Gen Xers, were the least likely age group to report getting enough sleep.
Jill, these are our people. These are our followers on the podcast and on the Instagram account. Though I know we range from Gen Z through the silent generation. I've heard from all of you, but we're talking to you, our main listeners here.
And their kids, by the way.
Yeah.
So just 39% of millennials say they're getting the requisite amount of sleep, which is considered 8 hours. Meanwhile, 55% of people 65 and over say they slept enough.
The boomers are getting their sleep, folks.
But a majority of adults of all ages say that they would feel better if they got more sleep. However, only 42% say they're getting as much as they need. As well as a clear generational gap, the data also shows that women are getting the least amount of sleep overall. The poll found 36% of women versus 48% of men were getting the sleep they need. Both figures are the lowest that Gallup has measured for each group since they started to ask the question.
Yeah, so what's interesting here, Jill, is you might be saying, I mean, what's new? People aren't getting enough sleep. But interestingly, if you look at the polling from Gallup, which is a highly reputed polling organization, until about 2014, 2015, a majority of Americans said they were getting as much sleep as they need. And then it starts to drop around 2013. And then at 2016, things cross, according to the Gallup poll here, where now a majority of Americans say they need more sleep, and a minority of Americans say they're getting enough sleep. Not sure why 2013, Jill, is that demarcation point. It's interesting, but we see this trend line now going for a decade.
Smartphones?
It might be smartphones. It might be social media. All of us doom scrolling at night. And you also, if you look at the numbers here from over the course of the past 30 years, the number of Americans who are getting 5 hours or less increases. Now, 1 out of 5 Americans is getting 5 hours or less of sleep for the first time. So I think technology certainly plays a role here. When breaking down some of the groups here, younger women are much less likely than other age and gender groups to say they're getting enough sleep. Older men are the most likely group getting enough sleep. So young women, least likely. Older men, most likely. One psychologist tells Newsweek, women typically report higher levels of stress in general than men. Often this relates to the burdens of balancing family or carrying responsibilities with a career, often leading to feelings of being overwhelmed. Overall, across the board here, you see all ages and genders getting less sleep here. Only 1 out of 4 Americans getting 8 or more hours of sleep these days.
I could totally relate to this because I'm such a night stressor, meaning that if I get up in the middle of the night to pee or whatever it is, anything that is stressing me out will keep me up at that point.
Jill, are you good with the middle of the night wake ups and going straight to bed? Or are you checking your phone?
So I recently purposely have moved my phone so it is not in arm's length from my bed. So that way I don't check it. But if I'm up for more than like 5 minutes and can't fall back to sleep, then admittedly I will. I know where it is, so I'll go get the phone.
I think I need to do that, Jill. I'm gonna move my phone charger very soon. All right, finally, on this April 16th, as you start your day, we have On This Day in History for you. Jill, speaking of sleep, here in this household, it's bedtime as we record this. If you can hear faint cries in the background, sweet Olivia is gradually going to bed. But let's get to On This Day in History on this April 16th. On this day in 1789, President-elect George Washington left Mount Vernon, Virginia on horseback for his inauguration in New York. Remember, that's where the capital was. Washington, D.C. is not home to presidents until after George Washington. On this day in 1962, Walter Cronkite became the anchor and managing editor of the CBS Evening News. Just after that, Jill, they changed the evening news from a 15-minute format to a 30-minute format, deciding that there was enough news happening in the world. They think they could fill 30 minutes.
And who would have thought, Moshe, there'd be 24-hour cable channels?
Within 20 years of that, within 18 years of that, actually, CBS is like, I think we can go 30 minutes. A little over a decade later, Ted Turner's like, I think I could do it for 24 hours over at CNN.
I'll see your 30 minutes and I'll raise you 24 hours.
When I was actually at CBS, Jill, I wanted to take the CBS Evening News an hour and do a second half hour over on streaming, but they couldn't get through all the logistics necessary for that at the time. All right, a famous letter here from Martin Luther King written on this day in 1963, the letter from Birmingham jail. It is the document in which the civil rights activist responded to a group of local clergymen who had criticized him for leading street protests. King defended his tactics, writing, famously, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." All right, on this day in 2003, Michael Jordan's final retirement. He played his final NBA game on this day in 2003, playing for the Washington Wizards. They would lose to the 76ers that day. So he retires as a Bull in 94 to go play baseball. He comes back. He retires as a Bull again in 98. He comes back for the Wizards and then retires again. And as we told you recently, made bank on his purchase and sale of the Charlotte NBA franchise. He is now a multi-billionaire.
Which means, like Mark Cuban, he's probably paying a lot of taxes this year.
It depends on who his accountant is, Jill. I haven't seen MJ get on Twitter talking about how proud he is to pay taxes. All right, we end here with a bit of pop culture. On this day in 1983, 41 years ago today, Journey released their song Faithfully. Jill, I feel like there's a lot fewer people who do Faithfully at karaoke versus the other Journey hit, Don't Stop Believin'.
I was just thinking that Journey doesn't get enough love on this podcast. I feel like we go to the same few groups, but let's bring Journey in the mix. I like it.
Noted. Thanks for the feedback, Jill. You play an important role on this podcast. All of it except for On This Day in History, but we appreciate your commentary on This Day in History. All right, on this day in 2001, this was sort of an iconic early 2000s show, The Weakest Link, hosted by Ann Robinson, premiered on NBC. We had a time, Jill, in the US where we had a number of British TV hosts who would just yell at Americans, and that was like what we were totally into. She was
We loved it. We loved every second of it.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye.
Moshe, I feel like that would not work with the younger generation now. It has to be like, you did a great job. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes. Folks, you can still hear my cough as I try to get through here.
Yes, before this podcast, Moshe said, please don't make me laugh.
Yeah, Jill, at that same time, you'd go to another network and you had Simon Cowell yelling at folks, and then go to another network and you had Gordon Ramsay yelling at folks. So fun era in reality and game show TV. Finally, as we leave here, Nelly's Hot in Here, released on this day in 2002. Same era, Jill. We were getting yelled at by British TV hosts, and Nelly was top of the charts for a couple of years there.
Speaking of getting hot in here, the weather finally gorgeous in the East Coast this week. And with that, hope everyone is enjoying their day. Thank you for listening to the Mo.news podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And review us in the App Store. We'd really appreciate it.
Jill, I'm disappointed you didn't want to talk further about Country Grammar as an album versus Nellyville as an album.
Noted. I guess that if I'm going to give you feedback about On This Day, you could give me feedback as well. So, okay, next time I will do better to discuss Nelly's albums.
Yeah, just research St. Louis rap, early 2000s, Country Grammar, EI, Hot in Here, Ride With Me. You danced to it back in the day.
And still do. My daughter is first discovering all of these songs. Every once in a while, they'll come up on my 2000s channel. And she's like, what is this? Put this on my playlist.
You're like, this is Nelly. And if you want to know more about Nelly, call Moshe. All right, see you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast.